Hey everyone, tonight we are going to dive into one of the most harrowing tales of human endurance ever recorded, how a man survived 438 days alone on the wide, merciless ocean. We'll explore the moment everything changed, the fierce battles against nature, and the resilience that carried him through nearly a year and a quarter of isolation. So before we get started, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel so I can keep making better videos. Now enjoy a cup of hot tea and let's embark on this journey together tonight. The night air had been deceptively calm as the freighter carved its slow path through the South Pacific. Endless swells rolled beneath its steel hull in a rhythmic lullaby, an oceanic pulse that lulled the crew into routine. He stood on the deck's starboard side, hands braced against the cold rail, watching phosphorescent fizz trail behind like spectral fireflies. The moon waning and shrouded by thin clouds cast a muted glow that danced upon the waves. In those quiet moments, the sea whispered promise and peril in equal measure. He breathed deeply, tasting salt and diesel, unaware that the stillness presaged a cataclysm beyond any sailor's worst nightmare. Without warning, the clouds above ruptured. A low rumble rolled across the sky, deep and ominous, as if the heavens themselves were tearing open. The horizon tilted, and a wall of black water brimming with rain and roaring wind rose like a jagged mountain. Crew shouts split the air, orders in clipped accents, panicked cries, as men scrambled to secure loose cargo. He kicked free an unsecured coil of rope and lunged for the railing, heart pounding. The deck lurched violently. Steel groaned under stress. In that instant, time fractured between intention and outcome. Lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the chaos in stark white flashes. A monstrous wave barreled down, cresting higher than the ship's forecastle. He felt rather than saw it approach a living thing, immense and merciless. Wet darkness followed each flash, punctuated by thunder that shook him to his core. The crew's frantic movements slowed, frozen by primal terror. He clutched at the railing with every sinew knuckles whitening as the wave tore toward him. In that heartbeat, he realized survival would come down to one thing: sheer will. The waves struck with apocalyptic force. Water cascaded over the deck in a deafening roar, sweeping away coils of rope barrels and half-secured crates. He was yanked off his feet as though invisible hands had seized him. Air exploded from his lungs, replaced by the cool, stinging embrace of salt water. He tumbled head over heels, the world inverted, weightless, and uncontrolled. Metal groaned again as the ship listed a desperate tilt that sent men and machinery crashing into one another. He was a leaf in a storm spun into chaos and hurled into the abyss. He broke the surface of the water moments later, gasping in jagged gulps. The freighter's lights were gone, swallowed by rain and foam. All around him, the sea churned into a slurry of debris, planks, crates, coils of rope, and the distant shape of a life ring spinning away. His lungs burned as he kicked it upward, arms slicing through the water in frantic strokes. Salt filled his mouth, nostrils, and eyes, and every breath felt like fire. Panic clawed at his mind, urging him to give in, to let the current claim him. but his hands found hold of a floating plank, rough and waterlogged, and he clung with desperate strength. Darkness enveloped him, punctuated only by the intermittent flashes of lightning. The wind shrieked as though in triumph, driving sheets of rain into his face. He drew himself astride the plank muscles, screaming and retched over its edge, as seawater and fear emptied from his body. His soaked shirt clung to him, a sodden reminder of gravity's unrelenting pull. Around him, the ocean's surface roiled like a living beast, each wave a promise of oblivion. He pressed his cheek against the wood, tasting salt and fear, and closed his eyes to steady his racing heart. His mind raced. He tried to remember the safety drills, the lifeboat locations, the emergency protocols drilled into him since his first day at sea, but fear had washed knowledge away. The ship, his only chance of rescue, had slipped beyond sight. Gone. He realized he was utterly alone in the vast wild. The realization burned brighter than any storm his life now depended on. His own wits, his own strength, and an unbreakable refusal to surrender to despair. With every thunderclap, the sea seemed to roar as if mocking his vulnerability. He wrapped arms around the plank's narrow edge, knuckles white, and lifted his chin. His teeth bit down on his lip until pain bled bright warmth into his thoughts. He would not let this night be his final one. Somewhere beyond the darkness lay dawn promise of calmer waters, of rescue, of home. He clung to that idea like a lifeline, breathing slowly driving breath into steady resolve. As the storm raged around him, he allowed himself a single thought survive. The word echoed stark and resolute. It would become his mantra, his guiding light through the days to come. And so on that furious night, beneath a sky torn asunder, a solitary man drifted on a fragment of wreckage, his fate undecided, his spirit unbowed. In the heart of the tempest, an ember of hope glowed faint, flickering, but fiercely alive. He drifted on the plank, through the tail end of the storm's fury, each wave threatening to dash him against the floating wreckage strewn around. The rain had slowed to a steady, stinging drizzle, and the wind's howl dimmed to a mournful moan. His muscles trembled from adrenaline and cold. Every joint ached as he clung to his slender raft of wood. Pale dawn glimmered on the horizon, though it offered no warmth, only the promise of light in the gray expanse. He felt the plank shift beneath him, bobbing like a cork, and he knew it wouldn't hold his weight much longer. With a final surge of determination, he heaved himself to the side and let go, plunging into the churning sea. His arms and legs flailed instinctively, and he grabbed at anything that floated nearby, a battered barrel, half full of rainwater, a snapping length of rope, a splintered crate wall. A cluster of debris lay just beyond his reach. He kicked fiercely, using all the strength he had left after hours of battling waves. Salt water blistered his lips and burned his eyes, but he refused to blink. Inch by painful inch, he edged toward that jumble of plastic drums and wooden slats until his fingertips grazed a rotten rope loop. He closed his hand around it, fingers numb but alive with relief. He dragged himself onto the nearest barrel, gasping as the barrel lurched under his weight. Seaweed clung to his clothes, and barnacles scraped against his ribs, but he didn't care. He shifted arm over arm onto a section of deck panel sealed with rusted bolts. He lay prone, chest heaving, pulse pounding in his ears like a second heartbeat. For a long moment, he simply lay there, too exhausted to move, willing himself to pray, but finding his mind too raw with shock and fear. When the nausea passed, he rolled onto his back and glanced around. The storm's wreckage had spread into a ring flotsam that once belonged to the ship's cargo. Plastic jerry cans, metal sheets, overturned chairs, and bits of broken machinery bobbed on the oily surface. Something about that broken circle felt like a boundary, a makeshift island in the infinite ocean. He realized these scattered fragments were now his only refuge. Without them, he'd be swallowed by the sea. His chest tightened at the thought, and he forced himself to breathe, inhaling despite the stench of fuel and rot. He sat up carefully, head spinning. He tested his limbs one by one, wincing at pain in his shoulder, where a plank had jabbed him during the fall. Wounds wept with salt water, and his knuckles were raw from clutching rope and splintered wood. He flexed each finger, relishing the ache it proved he was alive. He scanned the sky clouds, hung heavy and low, but the worst of the gale had passed. He listened for the hum of ship engines or the roar of a distant plane. All he heard was the hush of the sea and his own heartbeat. He needed to find something more stable. With great effort, he staggered to his feet atop the jumble and peered over a larger piece of decking. A crate, its label long since erased by salt and sun, offered a makeshift platform. He climbed up, legs shaking, and balanced precariously. Below him, the barrel ring creaked and shifted. He sensed that the next few moments could send him plunging back into the dark water, but he dared not linger in indecision. Steadying himself by wrapping an arm around a rusted support beam, once part of a shelving unit, he let go of the crate and swung onto a broader slab of metal flooring. On that larger piece, he found two more life rings entangled in seaweed. One was frayed and torn, the other surprisingly intact. He pried the intact one free, tossing it beside him. The circular shape, bright white, now dulled by grime, seemed to pulse with possibility. If he could tie it to his makeshift raft, he'd gain both buoyancy and a holdfast. He tied the ring to a length of rope salvaged from a barrel bundle, looping it through his belt and around the ring's worn handles. It felt clumsy, but reassuring, a tether between him and something that once had purpose. He allowed himself a scant moment of calm, closing his eyes against the bitter wind. In his memory flitted images of home, a small kitchen window framed by ivy, the smell of fresh coffee in the morning light, her laugh as she teased him about checking the lock one more time. Those memories were fragile and distant, almost as ephemeral as the plank he'd clung to. Yet they grounded him, reminding him that he had a reason to fight to stretch each moment of life beyond the rusted debris. A dull hunger began to gnaw at his belly. He hadn't eaten since before the storm, and thirst clawed at his throat. He scanned the wreckage for anything that might contain water. A half-buried barrel with a corroded cap caught his eye. He pried it open with a shard of metal, bringing the jagged edge to his lips. The water inside was brackish and dark, fouled by oil slicks and decay. He spat it out immediately, lungs burning with the bitter taste. He pressed his forehead against the barrel's rim and closed his eyes. He needed water, but needed it safe. He recalled the safety kits aboard the freighter desalination packets. Any rationed supply would have been on deck. But here, among broken crates and barrels, scattered by the gale, nothing was identifiable. He searched frantically until his hand brushed against a green, cylindrical container half hidden beneath a bundle of rope. Its label obliterated by salt gave no clue. He opened it carefully, heart pounding. Inside, wrapped in plastic, were 2 yellow water purification tablets. He held them up, light, filtering through ragged clouds, and felt a swell of triumph. They were soaked and pitted, but still intact. He drank greedily from the barrel, feeling each swallow burn, but bring relief. Splitting the tablets with a jagged piece of metal, he dropped fragments into the water, stirring with a stick. He snapped from a broken mast support. The concoction bubbled faintly as he waited the prescribed time. He crouched one hand on the barrel for support and gazed at the horizon. Waves rolled gently now, less threatening, as if the sea had spent its rage and settled into exhaustion. A thin line of pink light traced the edge of the water where dawn advanced. Minutes felt like hours, but when the purification cycle ended, he lifted the barrel and took a small sip, then another. The liquid was no longer foul. It was merely salty and warm. He drank as much as he dared, mindful not to overfill his stomach, storing the rest in the jerry can beside him. Each swallow steadied his resolve, cooling fevered thoughts with clarity. He counted the moments 1, 2, 3. Gratitude rose alongside his hope. He would not perish of thirst. Nourished and bolstered by that first draft, he rose to his feet. The tide carried his makeshift raft slowly, almost inquisitively, across the water. He looked down at his trembling hands. They were raw scars of his ordeal, but capable. Each knuckle told a story of survival. He stacked smaller pieces of wood into a crude platform, binding them with rope until the structure no longer threatened to collapse. The life ring, tied securely, would keep him afloat if larger boards gave way. He tested its stability with gentle pressure and allowed himself a small, victorious smile. He surveyed the scene, a chaotic garden of debris that against all odds gave him a foothold in an indifferent world. He was neither ship nor shore, neither captive nor victim. He was a man afloat on fragments of possibility, and on that drifting platform of broken hopes made new, he resolved to endure whatever came, as long as dawn broke, as long as his heart beat, as long as he clung to life. He woke to muted sunlight filtering through ragged clouds, casting a pale glow across his drifting platform. The makeshift raft bobbed in gentle swells, but he knew complacency was danger's cousin. If the boards loosened or the rope frayed, he would plunge into the cold void once more. Determination steeled his limbs. Today he would build something sturdier, something to carry him through months of uncertainty. He rose, slowly testing each joint. The life ring at his side nudged him when he shifted weight. It reminded him that buoyancy was everything. He reached for lengths of rope tangled in seaweed and coiled them neatly across the deck. Then he located 3 broken pallets lying nearby. He'd noticed them half sunk yesterday. They were waterlogged and heavy, but their crossbeams promised structural strength. With great effort, he pried one free using a shard of metal for leverage. Salt water hissed where it met the cold steel. He dragged the pallet onto his platform, positioning it parallel to the crate that had been his first foothold. Each movement was calculated. He wedged the beams under the metal sheet, bracing it against the life ring to prevent sliding. He worked methodically, binding each joint with rope plucked from frayed coils. His fingers, raw from yesterday's toil, pricked at every strand, but he pressed on. The first pallet felt secure. He repeated the process with the remaining 2, aligning their beams so that the 3 would form a stable triangle, a tripod of wood that would better distribute his weight. As he secured the final pallet, the raft creaked ominously. He paused, chest tight with anxiety, and pressed his ear to the wood. The boards groaned but held. He tightened each knot again, looping rope twice around each intersection. When he was satisfied, he lay back, exhaustion washing over him. Yet even fatigue felt like progress, proof he could labor, adapt, and overcome. Next came the deck. He scavenged nearby planks and panels, crooked strips of flooring, and metal sheeting half buried in seaweed. He lifted each piece carefully, lest the entire structure topple. Balancing atop the pallets, he wove the planks across the beams, creating a lattice that would support his weight more evenly. Where gaps appeared, he wedged smaller shards of wood until the surface felt solid. He found a tarnished metal bracket and used it like a clamp, jamming it across 2 planks and binding it with rope as a makeshift fastener. Halfway through, his stomach growled a dull reminder of yesterday's meager rations. But hunger was secondary to shelter. A sturdy raft would carry him to tomorrow, but hunger could be managed with ingenuity. He paused only long enough to spit seawater from his mouth, then resumed his labor. As the decking took shape, he realized the raft still lacked protection from the sun's relentless glare. He rummaged through tangled tarpaulin remnants, spotting a tattered blue sheet caught on a piece of twisted metal. It was frayed at the edges and torn through the middle, but wide enough if he patched it. He dragged it onto the raft and laid it across one side. Using strips of rope, he tied its corners to the pallet beams, creating a slanted canopy. It billowed in the breeze but anchored firmly. Underneath it, he found shade and a cooler patch of deck, an oasis of respite in this floating desert. The final task was buoyancy reinforcement. He remembered the cargo manifest mentioning empty jerry cans stored on deck. A quick scan uncovered 3 more among the drift. He hauled each to the raft and slotted them beneath the decking, tying them tightly so they wouldn't slip free. Their sealed interiors would trap air and keep the raft afloat even if the wood became waterlogged and sank. With every jerry can in place, he tested the platform's buoyancy by gently shifting his weight from side to side. The raft dipped and rose predictably, but held its form. A grin cracked his sunburned face. This was no mere pile of debris, but a vessel he had forged with his own hands. He sat cross-legged in the shaded portion, letting the mild swell cradle him. The wind had dropped to a whisper, and the ocean's surface was now a polished mirror reflecting the sky's melancholy blues and grays. He closed his eyes and allowed himself a long exhale, chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. In that moment of calm, memories drifted in the steady click of rope against mast, the camaraderie of the crew, the soft laughter at dawn's first light. He felt their absence keenly, but honored their memory by persisting. Solitude could crush the spirit, but creation like this raft could rebuild it. He rummaged beside him and produced the frayed life ring, now more than ornament. He threaded more rope through its handles, binding it beneath the decking's edge, so it formed a bumper all around the raft. Should he collide with debris or hit a sharp reef, the ring would absorb some impact, protecting both wood and flesh. Last, he needed a means of propulsion. He had no oar, but he spied a broken mast spar protruding from the wreckage field. It was waterlogged but sturdy. Using a sharpened shard of metal, he carved notches into one end, shaping a crude paddle. It was uneven and heavy, but functional. He balanced it across his lap, testing its swing in the still water, noting how it caught the current. With practiced strokes, he learned to coax the raft forward, steering by shifting his weight. By midday, the raft was complete. It measured roughly 6 feet across, enough for him to sit or lie down. The shaded canopy offered brief relief from the sun, and the jerry cans thumped reassuringly against the undersides. He hefted the raft with surprising ease and nudged it into open water. The jerry cans lifted it, making it glide atop the sea like a wandering lily pad. He dipped the paddle into the water, drawing a small wake behind him. For the first time since he'd drifted away from the freighter, he felt a surge of control over his destiny. The ocean remained indifferent, its vastness unchanging, but now he had a craft worthy of its challenges. He scanned the horizon for landmarks, nothing but open water. Yet the emptiness no longer felt threatening. It was a canvas for possibility. With each stroke, he propelled himself toward an unknown destiny, armed with shelter, buoyancy, and will. As the small raft rode the current, he allowed himself a moment of quiet pride. He had turned wreckage into a tool, despair into determination. The ocean's vast heart might swallow many, but he would not be one of them. Guided by the faint hum of wind in the canopy and the gentle slap of water against wood, he set his gaze westward toward the promise of rescue or discovery. Either way, he had given himself a fighting chance. The sun climbed higher, its relentless glare turning the ocean into a boiling expanse of light. He shielded his eyes beneath the tattered canopy and scanned the horizon. There was no cloud bank likely to yield rain for days. Already his tongue felt thick and swollen, and each swallow scraped his throat raw. He had stored some brackish water in the jerry cans, but it was a meager supply. Without fresh water, he risked dehydration within 2 days. He closed his eyes and recalled the survival manuals he'd memorized in training, rain catchment solar stills, and condensation traps. Now theory would meet the merciless test of reality. He pivoted the raft to face the mild breeze and tied a length of rope between 2 pallet beams, creating a horizontal line. From his belt pouch, he withdrew a strip of waterproof fabric, part of his safety kit, torn free when he crafted the canopy. He draped the cloth over the rope, securing its corners with wooden pegs fashioned from splintered supports. The makeshift awning sagged in the center, forming a shallow trough. Beneath it, he placed 3 empty plastic drums with open mouths pointing upward. His plan: collect rainwater runoff into the barrels. But with no rain in sight, he needed more. He stood aside and watched the sun beat down on the wet deck panels. Tiny droplets of condensation emerged where the heat met the cooler metal, a trivial amount, but it was moving. He recalled how to build a solar still trap moisture in a sealed environment and collect evaporated moisture. But on this improvised raft, space was limited. Inspired, he grabbed the largest plastic sheet he'd found yesterday, scraps of packaging cling-wrapped around cargo. He laid it across the deck, smoothing wrinkles, then weighted each corner with stones and metal fragments. The sheet formed a slanted roof over one barrel. He sealed the edges with strips of torn cloth, pressing them against the barrel rim to create a funnel. When moisture evaporated from the deck panel beneath the sheet, it would condense on the plastic and drip into the barrel. It was rudimentary, but workable. While setting the still, he gathered every piece of absorbent material he could find. Old towels from the ship's linen cart, scraps of sailcloth, and a few swabs of surgical gauze from the emergency kit. He placed them beneath the tarp trough, hoping they'd wick morning dew. Then he fashioned a flexible trough from a flattened length of metal sheeting, angling it to guide any ambient moisture into the drums. His hands were blistered, but he worked steadily, pausing only to drink a small sip of the brackish water, careful not to waste it. As midday heat reached its peak, he climbed onto the metal sheet beneath the still and lay flat, careful not to disturb the seal. He let the warmth transfer through the sheet, accelerating evaporation from beneath. Droplets formed on the underside of the plastic above him, glinting like tiny jewels. With a stick, he guided the first few to the edge, where they plopped into the barrel with muffled thunks. It was barely more than a teaspoon, but it was proof that the system worked. He exhaled with relief. Even if no rain fell for days, he could eke out moisture from the raft itself. He fetched the medical syringe from his kit, small plastic, and intended for injecting injectable water purification chemicals. Now it would serve as a tool. He used the needleless end to siphon condensation from the plastic's underside into the waiting containers. For each drop collected, his hope swelled. By late afternoon, he had gathered nearly half a liter of fresh water. He tilted the drums toward the sun, using the heat to encourage more evaporation beneath the still. He covered the sun-facing side of the tarp with a reflective sheet of foil torn from food rations, focusing light onto the deck panel. The temperature beneath rose, and the condensation tip dripped more rapidly. Sweat beaded on his brow as he worked, but he ignored the discomfort. Each bead would pay dividends as water. In the quiet between tasks, he paused to reflect on the irony stranded on water. He fought for every drop of sweetness he could coax from metal and cloth. The ocean's vastness mocked his efforts, yet it also provided the platform for ingenuity. He looked at the drums now weighted with brine dark liquid and fresh pale droplets. He tested the mix by tasting one careful sip, then rinsing it with the purified water he'd already collected. The flavor was acrid, but it passed the burn test, no burning sensation down his esophagus. He marked the water line on the drum with a knife tip, noting how much fresh water he'd secured. Night approached, and the sky painted itself in bruised purples and indigos. He stashed the improvised still beneath the canopy to protect it from dew collapse, and switched his focus to rain anticipation. He positioned a larger canvas sheet at a steeper angle and propped it with a slender spar, creating a chute for potential downpours. Then he laid down beside the drums, back against the life ring bumper, and closed his eyes. Stars emerged in the velvety sky, and he traced constellations with a tired finger. The cosmos, vast and unchanging, reminded him of his insignificance and his capacity for wonder. He whispered a silent prayer of gratitude for the day's yield. With the fresh water system in place, he had bought time, days, maybe weeks. He vowed to improve it tomorrow, to expand the still, to find more sources. The gentle sway of the raft rocked him toward exhaustion, but his mind swirled with designs and possibilities. Sleep came in fitful waves, punctuated by the slap of water against the jerry cans. In dreams, he walked along the shoreline of a familiar beach, waves lapping at his feet, hands warm around hers. He woke at the first hint of dawn, head pounding, but life thrummed in his veins. The drums glistened with dew, and he rose to greet the new day. With sunrise came renewed energy. He surveyed his water harvesting setup. The trough held clear droplets. The still promised more. He adjusted angles, tightened seals, and replaced soaked absorbents with fresh cloth. Then he climbed atop the platform, scanning for any sign of rain. None came, but the equipment hummed with potential. He refilled his syringe and began collecting drop by drop, channeling them into smaller flasks for rationing. Each vial he filled felt like a talisman against death. As he worked, his thoughts drifted to home and the faces waiting there unaware of his plight. The memory of her smile lent urgency to every drop collected. He pressed his palm against the drum, feeling the weight of water like a warming presence. He knew thirst would return, but tonight he would sleep, knowing he'd done all he could to stay alive. The sun soared overhead again, and he set to work reinforcing his system, adding extra tarp supports, linking drums for overflow, and rigging a small flag from cloth scraps to catch every possible raindrop. By midday, he had secured nearly 2 liters of collected water, enough to keep him alive through another scorching day. He paused, shoulders sagging, and let the heat wash over him. Then he wiped sweat from his brow and whispered, "Thank you." As afternoon slid into evening, he gathered his tools and sheltered the equipment beneath the canopy. The fresh water barrels sat like oases at his side, their narrow necks capped to prevent evaporation. He lay down against the wood, tucking knees to chest, and stared up at the evening sky. The ocean around him was calm now, waves whispering secrets. In that moment, he felt a quiet triumph, not over the sea, but over the hunger for life's simplest necessity. Tomorrow, he'd refine his system further, but tonight, he'd drink his fill and dream of rain. And with that, he drifted into sleep, the world reduced to the gentle rhythm of his breathing and the soft murmur of water against wood. Dawn broke in a wash of pale lavender, the horizon softening into promise. He roused himself with a stiff stretch, his muscles protesting every movement. The makeshift canopy cast dappled light across the raft, illuminating the barrels of water and the condensing solar still. Hunger gnawed at his belly harder than thirst had, and he knew that without food, his strength would ebb as swiftly as the water he'd so painstakingly harvested. He steeled himself, recalling survival lessons and the memory of the ship's galley, a bustling room filled with steam laughter and the clatter of cutlery. Now his table was the endless sea, and his tools were fragments of a shattered world. First, he needed a fishing line. From the wreckage field, he scavenged a length of braided wire, once part of the freighter's rigging, and fashioned it into line by stripping away frayed strands until he had a single supple cord. He found a hook among the debris, a corroded fish hook tangled in a netting remnant. He cleaned it on a rough plank, guessing that if it had held crate covers, it could catch a fish. For bait, he pulled apart a clump of seaweed, plucked a few small barnacles from a metal drum, and crushed them between his teeth, mixing them with a pinch of salt water. The briny paste clung to the hook like a makeshift worm. Balancing on the edge of his raft, he dangled the line over the side. The water, now calm, looked deceptively tranquil, an endless expanse of glimmering glass. Minutes passed. Each ripple held hope. He breathed slowly, training himself not to flinch at passing shadows or drifting debris. Then far below he spotted movement, a flash of silver darting through the turquoise depths. His heart quickened. He flicked his wrist, sending the hooked bait into their path. He waited, chest rising and falling in silent rhythm. Suddenly the line snapped taut. He froze, eyes narrowing as the tension played out. A tug, then a stronger pull. Something had taken the bait. His fingers tightened on the line knuckles white. He wrestled backward, leaning against the life ring bumper to brace himself. The fish fought, thrashing and shaking, creating wake around the raft's edges. He knelt, feet braced, and began to reel it in winding wire rope around a metal cog salvaged from a gearbox. Inch by inch, the creature broke the surface, a queenfish glistening and alive, its iridescent scales flickering in the dawn light. He exhaled relief and triumph coursing through him. With care, he lifted the fish onto the deck, its gills fluttering in the warm air. He spared it a moment's pity, another life taken for survival, then used the jagged shard of metal he carried to swiftly dispatch it. Its body went limp, and he bowed his head in silent thanks before gutting and cleaning the fish on a flat plank. He saved the head and bones, tying them in a scrap of cloth to use later as foul bait or compost to attract other species. He fired up his small stove, a battered camping burner he'd salvaged from a broken kit, and filled its makeshift fuel tank with denatured alcohol from a vial in his survival pack. The flame sputtered to life, a small blue whisper in the vastness. He skewered chunks of fish on a sharpened splinter and held them above the flame, turning methodically until the flesh flaked easily. Steam rose, carrying a smoky sweetness that reminded him of home-cooked meals and the laughter of the cook whose pots he'd once cleaned. He ate slowly, savoring the warmth and sustenance. Each bite fortified him, stitching energy back into his bones. When he finished, he wrapped the remaining fillets in cloth and stowed them in a shaded crevice beneath the decking where they'd keep cool for a day. He cleaned his gear, submerging the hook and line in seawater, then drying them on the canopy's frame. But fish alone would not suffice. He needed variety and supply. His eyes drifted to the raft's edge, where patches of seaweed clung to floating timbers. Among the reeds, he spotted long strands of sargassum, its fronds dotted with small air bladders. The seaweed's texture promised both nutrition and roughage. He cut a length free with his blade and drew it into the raft, rinsing it in a barrel of fresh water. He sampled a frond, salty, supple, slightly bitter. It would fill the gaps in his diet and provide essential vitamins. He next fashioned a small gathering rake from 2 bent metal rods tied together at the handle. He pushed it into the water beside the raft, flicking through clumps of seaweed, gathering enough for a meal. As he worked, he noticed that small fish and crustaceans darted among the floating masses. He prepared a net from torn cloth strips knotted together, creating a crude mesh bag. He dipped it into the water and scooped, closing it swiftly as creatures tumbled inside. He carried the net aboard and emptied it onto the deck, tiny crabs still moving their pincers, small shrimps, and a scattering of fish fry. He sorted them quickly, discarding damaged or spoiled specimens. He reserved the smallest crabs for future bait and cleaned the rest in fresh water. He tossed shrimp and crab meat together and wrapped them in seaweed leaves, then steamed the parcels over the stove. The aroma was briny and rich, a reminder of coastline kitchens and the laughter of seaside markets. He ate with gratitude, his mouth stinging slightly from the salt and spice, but his body welcomed the protein. The foraging went on through midday. He scoured scrapwood for a flat surface to act as a cutting board and hammered makeshift nails, shards of metal hammered with a rock into support beams to hang his catch in the sun. As the sun climbed, he felt the day's heat settle into his bones, and he drank fresh water in small sips, mindful of rationing. He rinsed his mouth afterward, the cool liquid a balm against the sunburn patching his lips. His raft floated slowly, carried by the gentle current that led westward. He tracked his position by the sun's angle, carving notches into a plank to mark each hour. These tally marks would guide him through days and nights, an anchor in time's relentless flow. Each day he'd adjust his path, steering toward shipping lanes, island chains on his mental map, any sign of rescue. As evening approached, he prepared to secure his day's catch. He strung fish fillets on lengths of rope hung under the canopy to dry and preserve. The drying fish would last longer, and its concentrated flavor would sate hunger in leaner times. He spread seaweed sheets on top of the raft's canopy to dry as well, intending to store them for future meals and bait. He tied pouches of shrimp and crab meat in cloth and hung them in the shade where they'd cool without spoiling. Under the fading light, he paused to reflect on the day's work. He had caught, cleaned, cooked, and preserved enough to feed himself for several days. Each action had required ingenuity, crafting tools from wreckage, using the sun's heat and salt for preservation, turning floating debris into food and shelter. The ocean might be vast, but it offered sustenance to those who looked beyond its surface. Night settled with a gentle hush, the stars reflected in the sea's glassy skin. He shared a final meal, a small portion of dried fish softened in warm water, paired with crisp toasted seaweed. He washed it down with fresh water, rinsing his palate and spirit. Then he lay against the decking eyes, tracing the constellations overhead. Tomorrow he'd refine his lines, perhaps fashion a longer pole to reach deeper water, or experiment with traps to catch larger quantities. But tonight he'd rest his belly full and his purpose renewed. In the darkness, the sea whispered lullabies of distant shores. He listened, letting the rhythm of waves soothe his aching limbs and mind. Hunger might return, but he had answered its challenge this day. He closed his eyes, the taste of salt and smoke lingering on his tongue, and drifted into a sleep, buoyed by hard-won victory. The morning sun rose like a scorching sentinel, its rays slicing through the gaps in his patched canopy and painting his skin with a fiery crown. He blinked against the glare, feeling last night's slumber leave him stiff and sunburned. His arms and face were mottled red, the burned skin tight and raw. He reached for the small tin of aloe gel he'd salvaged from the ship's medical stores and applied it gently, wincing as cold relief met inflamed flesh. Each application brought a brief reprieve, but he knew the sun would return with vengeance the moment he emerged from shade. He paused to survey his surroundings. The ocean stretched unbroken, an endless expanse of silver and blue. Clouds drifted low in the east, pale cotton wisps that might herald afternoon squalls. He traced patterns in the sky, recalling meteorology lessons. A rising barometer signified fair weather, but a sudden drop would usher storm clouds. He touched the makeshift gauge, carved on a plank tally marks, indicating dwindling water food and hope. Now he added a new mark for sunburn, a reminder that nature's extremes would threaten him from both above and below. He rose and retrieved the paddle, pushing the raft into motion. He steered toward a distant swatch of cloud shadows, a cooler slice of sea, where he might rest without roasting. Each stroke was heavy. His sun-scorched arms ached with every pull. Beads of sweat formed at his hairline and trickled down his back. He navigated past floating barrels and driftwood, mindful that collision could tear his canopy or splinter his fragile decking. After half an hour, he reached the shadowed patch. He angled the raft to remain within its cool embrace, then collapsed against the life ring bumper chest, heaving. Even in shade, the heat clung to him like a second skin. He drank a small ration of fresh water and applied more aloe, whispering to himself that survival was a sequence of small acts, shade, hydration, protection. The sun's glare off the water was like 1,000 mirrors, intensifying the burn. He grabbed a scrap of sailcloth and wrapped it around his head, knotting it low to shade his neck and ears. He wound another cloth strip across his chest, creating a loose sling to protect his shoulders. It was clumsy, but effective makeshift armor in a battle of elements. He settled into a rhythm paddle, 10 strokes, rest 5, apply gel, drink water, adjust to shade. This cycle carried him until the sky darkened abruptly. A low growl of thunder rolled across the waves, and the wind shifted, pulling his canopy taut. He stood heart-pounding and lashed the canopy more securely to the pallet beams. Rain began as a gentle hiss, then exploded into a drumming crescendo. The ocean's surface erupted in whitecaps, turning into a churning cauldron. The storm had arrived fierce and unannounced. He dumped the small stove to one side and secured his survival kit beneath the decking. The first raindrops splashed against his forehead, cold and welcome, but the welcome faded as wind-whipped sheets of rain lashed his face. He crouched beneath the canopy arms, wrapped around his knees, holding onto the pallet beams as his raft pitched and rolled. The wind snarled like a wild beast, tearing at cloth and rope. He felt the canopy strain, and with each gust feared it would tear free and leave him exposed. Lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the chaos in brilliant white. He glimpsed a towering wall of water racing toward him, a rogue wave born of the storm's fury. His stomach turned as the wave rose, cresting above his makeshift shelter. He seized the life ring and shoved himself toward the raft's edge, bracing his feet against the beams. Rain blinded him, stinging like a million needles. When the wave struck, it engulfed him, hurling him against the wooden lattice he'd painstakingly built. He crashed into the deck, wind knocked out of him, rain pounding his back, heart hammering in his chest. For a heartbeat, he lay face down, water sluicing through the gaps in the slats, dragging him toward the open sea. Instinct flared. He rolled, grabbed a beam, and hauled himself upright. His arms burned, lungs seized, but he remained on his feet, clutching the raft. He forced his gaze forward. The storm was a living entity, lashing him with rain and wind, bruising the sea into frenzy. He would not yield. He retied a snapped rope segment, his fingers numb and raw, and retightened beams that threatened to split. Between thunderclaps, he shouted profanities into the wind, an act of defiance that felt oddly cathartic. The storm answered with a roar, but he held fast. He dug his heels into the wood, leaning into the wind, using his body as a brace against the gale. Rain washed salt and sweat from his face, and he tasted freedom in the chaos here more than ever he was alive. After what felt like an eternity, the wind began to ebb. The rain slowed to a sullen drizzle, and the sea settled into heaving swells. He sank to his haunches, exhaustion crushing him. His muscles trembled, shoulders burning, but he managed a smile. He had weathered the storm. He looked at the raft, splintered in places, the canopy torn at one corner, rope frayed, but still afloat, still intact. He patted a beam with gratitude. He retrieved a container of fresh water, drinking deeply until his vision swam. He poured a trickle over his head, cooling the burn. Then he applied more aloe gel, rubbing it into red skin until his hands were slick. He tossed the cloth wrappers into the water, watching them drift away. He surveyed the sky clouds hung low, but patches of blue beckoned. He packed away his medical kit, securing every item lest another storm strike without warning. He spent the afternoon repairing damage, replacing a sliced rope with braided wire, patching tears in the canopy with spare fabric reinforcing beams that had shifted. Each repair reminded him that survival was not a single act, but an ongoing commitment. The storm had tested his ingenuity. Now he fortified against future assaults. Once repairs were complete, he angled the raft to catch the dying breeze. He paddled toward calmer waters, moving with the current rather than against the fractured waves. Each stroke was slower and more measured, as if the ocean itself asked him to respect its power. By dusk, the sea was glassy again, reflecting a crimson sunset that bled across the horizon. He angled his raft to face the sinking sun, letting the gentle swells carry him westward. Nightfall brought a brittle chill. He donned the sailcloth headdress and wrapped himself in a second layer of sail scraps. The deckboards creaked as he settled into a crouch beneath the canopy. He pulled the fresh fish fillets from their drying lines and nibbled a small portion, savoring the solid taste of nourishment. Then he scooped sips of water, savoring each swallow. He thought of sunburns to come and storms yet to arrive. He knew this day was but one in a long sequence of solar scorchings and tempestuous trials. But he also knew the sun's warmth could dry his wounds and the rain could renew his water supply. In extremes, life persisted. He traced the storm's path in his mind, marking its approach in the stars. Tomorrow, he'd harvest rainwater again, but he'd also adjust his tarp angles to shed sudden downpours. He'd carry extra cordage for quick repairs and keep his paddle within reach. Each lesson from the storm became a strategy for survival. He settled back against the life-ring gaze fixed on the first stars. The drama of sun and storm was neither foe nor friend, but a crucible forging his resolve. He whispered a promise to himself: whatever nature threw at him, he would adapt, endure, and emerge stronger. Above, the night sky held its silent vigil. Below, the ocean breathed in gentle pulses. Between them, a solitary man sat on a raft of battered dreams and fierce hope, determined to see another sunrise. Morning light revealed a new ordeal, a crimson welt gaping on his thigh, where a jagged shard of metal had nicked him during the storm's worst surge. The cut had seemed minor at first, no deeper than the skin's surface, but over the days, the edges darkened, swelling into a purple-red ring. He probed it gently with a stick, wincing as warmth and pressure answered his touch. Feverish aches pulsed through his body, and each step on the raft sent stabbing pains up his leg. Infection had taken root, and if left unchecked, it would claim him faster than thirst or hunger. He swallowed hard, heart thudding. He opened his medical kit and withdrew a small mirror meant for signaling rescue, but now pressed into service. He angled it beneath the flap of his makeshift canopy to catch the morning sun and examined the wound. Yellowish streaks ran from the cut's edges, and the surrounding flesh glowed hot to the touch. He blinked back panic. He knew gangrene when he saw it, death creeping inch by inch into living tissue. His survival training pulsed in his mind. Infections at sea could be fatal. Sometimes only debridement removal of dead flesh could save a limb or life. He recalled how surgeons back home had used scalpels, antiseptics, and strict hygiene. He had none of those luxuries here. Yet he could not succumb. He gathered his tools, a sharpened shard of metal he'd used as a paddle carving knife, the tiny bottle of alcohol-based antiseptic, strips of clean cloth, and fishing line for sutures. He braced himself on the edge of the raft, sunlight heating the wood and metal beneath. He washed his hands in fresh water, then poured antiseptic over them, smearing the stinging liquid across palms and fingers. His skin prickled. He inhaled deeply, tasting salt and haze, and pressed his tongue to the roof of his mouth to settle trembling nerves. He first irrigated the wound. Pouring fresh water from a syringe, he washed away crusted blood and pus, sending pale rivulets into a waiting barrel. Each rinse sent stabs of pain up his spine, and he clenched his jaw until his teeth ached. The wound's edges were ragged, darkened with necrotic tissue that refused to bleed. He traced the border with his finger, careful to avoid the most damaged areas. He marked the tissue he would remove a band of gray flesh that would not heal and only fuel the poison. Securing his footing against the life ring bumper, he gripped the blade's handle with one hand and the opposite beam with the other. He steadied his breathing inhale-exhale, then pressed the blade's tip to the first sloughing patch. The metal bit into skin with a wet rasp, sending a shock of agony through his leg. He stifled a cry, forcing breath through clenched teeth, and cut carefully downward, slicing away strips of dead flesh. He worked methodically, cutting small sections at a time, then pausing to rinse. His hands shook, but each stroke was controlled, deliberate. Half an hour passed as he carved away the necrosis. Blood welled and turned the water in the barrel a dark mahogany. Around him, the ocean's surface glittered, as though oblivious to his ordeal. He pressed on, peeling back the damaged tissue until healthy pink flesh appeared at the wound's edges. He wiped his blade on a cloth, each swipe smeared with red. He rinsed his eyes to clear blurred vision and resumed. When the gray had vanished, he paused to assess. The wound's depth frightened him, a tunnel gouged into muscle that pulsed with every heartbeat. Yet it was free of slough pink and granular at the margins. He pressed a cloth against it, stopping bleeding as best he could, then lathered the area with antiseptic. The alcohol hissed a final warning as it met open flesh, and he clenched his teeth against the pain. Next came sutures. He threaded fishing line through the eye of a bent needle he'd fashioned by sharpening the tip of a metal splinter. His fingers fumbled as he tied knots, but each stitch pulled the wound's edges closer. He worked from one end inward, placing evenly spaced loops until the gash closed in a zigzag seam. The process took another half hour, sweat mingling with tears he refused to let escape. With each stitch, he whispered encouragement, urging his body to heal and ward off infection. After the last knot, he applied a paste of crushed antiseptic tablet and fresh water, sealing the seam. He wrapped layers of clean cloth around the wound, binding it snugly, but not so tight as to cut off circulation. He fastened the bandage with strips of sailcloth, hiding the crude surgery from direct view under his clothing scraps. He tested the pressure with a gentle tap. The pain was duller, now the throbbing steadied. He sank to the raft's decking, exhaustion flooding him. The physical toll was immense, but the psychological burden was heavier. He closed his eyes, leaning his forehead against his hands and let himself shiver, tears finally slipping down sunburned cheeks. He had done what few could perform field surgery on himself, armed only with debris and raw will. The act marked his body and soul. He felt both broken and reborn. Night approached and he surveyed the raft. The canopy's torn corner fluttered in the breeze, the patchwork still held by fraying rope. He had water, food, shelter, and now a living wound that demanded vigilance. He arranged a lantern, his salvaged signal light, beside him. Its weak glow would help him monitor the bandage overnight. He removed the gauze twice more before sleep, inspecting the wound. It looked pinker, edges clean. He reapplied antiseptic and fresh cloth, humming a lullaby from childhood to quell the buzzing adrenaline. Each stitch and bandage was a promise that he would not give in, that he would heal. In the morning, he would tend it again. He would ration fresh water for cleaning and apply more antiseptic. He would continue westward toward shipping lanes and land. But tonight he lay between life and death, victory and surrender, held aloft by a raft of his own making and a spirit forged by adversity. He closed his eyes as the lantern guttered. The ocean whispered its steady lullaby. The stars shone like distant beacons, and his thigh throbbed with pain and promise. He drifted into slumber, knowing that the hardest surgery was behind him and the hardest days still lay ahead. He woke to the same endless expanse of water, a lonely companion, never speaking, but always present. In the dim light of dawn, the raft seemed smaller, the horizon wider, and the silence more complete. No gulls cried overhead, no waves whispered promise, only a vast hush that swallows sound and thought. He sat up slowly, muscles stiff from fever dreams, and stared at the blank sea. For many days, the solitude had been a challenge of resourcefulness, but now it had become a deeper menace, the slow fraying of his mind. He rose, clutching the life ring's rope bumper, and paced the tiny deck bridge to bridge the distance from bow to stern. 15 paces one way, 15 the other, over and over. His footsteps were soft against the wood, and the creaking of the raft became his only metronome. Each circuit offered brief distraction, a drift of seaweed, a floating barrel, before the emptiness returned. He counted the loops aloud, 1, 2, 29, but the numbers blurred, losing meaning. He realized that without another voice, his own would hollow out, leaving behind cavernous doubt. At midday, he sat beneath the canopy's shade and unfolded a scrap of paper, once part of a shipping manifest, scrawled with items and quantities. Even that array of crushed words felt distant, like the echo of a forgotten language. He traced the letters with a finger, inventing meanings for them. Lorry Barit Crate. He pronounced each aloud, testing his voice, keeping it warm and alive. Words breathed together, anchoring him to the world of speech and thought beyond this floating tomb. He then turned to rituals. He dipped a cloth into the freshwater drum and sprinkled droplets in a straight line across the deck before the life ring. A ceremony of safe passage, he told himself, warding off malevolent forces. With a sharpened stick, he carved a simple compass rose into a plank, orienting north by the sun's morning position. Each dawn, he would stand at its center and rotate 3 times, chanting a phrase he'd improvised, "I see the sky." I know my way. The ritual felt childish, but it reminded him that action, any action, could resist chaos. When his makeshift flute, cobbled from a hollowed spar, lay silent at his side, he lifted it to his lips and blew a trembling note. The sound wafted faint and wavering, then broke into two more, an instinctive melody born from memory. Music echoed across the water, finding no audience but his own ears. He exhaled, letting the notes dissipate. The act of creation, however small, anchored his mind to selfhood. He drew water from the barrel and swirled it in his palm, watching the droplets weave ephemeral patterns before falling. It reminded him of thought itself, momentarily coherent, then slipping away. He cupped his hands and drank slowly, savoring each gulp. The ritual of hydration became sacred. He would cleanse more than his thirst. He would cleanse his spirit of despair. Night brought new trials. Without stars' unerring map or moon's steady glow, darkness pressed close, and he felt watched by nothingness. He lit the lantern and placed it at the raft's prow, a beacon for unseen entities. He paced until dawn, stopping only to whisper his invented prayer, "Guard me, sea. Keep me here until the sun warms these bones." The words had no theology, no promise of heaven, but they offered structure to his fractured days. He marked time meticulously, tallying days on a length of rope by tying knots, one for each sunrise. He could not afford to lose track. The knowledge of his own endurance spurred him onward. Each knot was a small triumph, a testament to another night survived. But as knots multiplied, they also reminded him of the yawning gulf ahead. 438 was a number too vast to imagine. In the quiet lull before the next dawn, he spoke to the raft itself, giving it a name, Aegis. It meant protection. He imagined the boards as loyal planks, the rope as steadfast veins. Naming the raft transformed it from inanimate wreckage into companion and teammate. He thanked Aegis for bearing him and promised to care for it as it cared for him. He crafted a small altar beneath the canopy, a flat stone from one of the floating slabs, 2 dried fish fillets arranged neatly, a loop of rope shaped into a circle. Each evening he offered thanks by laying a fillet atop the stone, acknowledging the sea's bounty. If nothing else, gratitude tethered him to hope. One afternoon, delirium teased him into seeing distant shapes, an island palm frond, the silhouette of a ship, the face of a friend calling from shore. Each vision dissolved on approach, leaving him gasping and ashamed of his own mind's betrayals. He responded by doubling his rituals, more knots, more prayers, more offerings. He poured water from one barrel to another in measured cups, as though performing a scientific experiment rather than a spiritual act. Despite the rituals, despair pressed like a weight on his chest. He found himself weeping at night, tears mingling with rain or dew indistinguishable. He wept for the loss of home, for the distance between his mind and the shore, for the randomness of existence. But even this release brought relief, a purging that eased the pressure in his skull. He remembered the crew's laughter at shared meals, the jostle of voices in the galley, the warmth of fellowship. He imagined each of them standing at the horizon, waving their arms until they blurred into dust. He spoke their names aloud, recalling snippets of conversation. In doing so, he carried them with him, weaving memories into his own narrative. With each passing day, his rituals grew more elaborate. He drew a map on a plank, rough lines indicating the sun's arc potential shipping lanes islands he'd researched in his mind. He plotted Aegis's course as if guiding a vessel, reciting coordinates that existed only in memory. The act grounded him in purpose. He did not merely drift, he journeyed. By the 32nd day alone, his rituals were sustaining him more than food or water. They structured time, warded off panic, and gave meaning to each action, from tying knots to playing his flute. Solitude remained a specter, but he met it with defiance through creativity. He would not be devoured by silence. He would fill it with numbers, words, music, and gratitude. As another night cloaked the ocean, he lay on the raft's deck, heart steady, under the soft murmur of waves. He whispered into the dark, "I endure." The sea answered with a gentle sigh, as though in acknowledgement. In that moment, he understood that to survive the deep ocean for 438 days, he must first survive himself, and he had taken the first vital steps. Morning mist lay like a silken veil across the water when he first detected it, a dark line on the horizon, barely more than a whisper against the pale sky. His heart jolted in his chest muscles, tightening around the paddle as though bracing for impact. He snapped a tally knot on the rope, day 57, and leapt to the raft's edge, breath catching in his throat. Through binocular shards, crafted from broken glasses and sea-scratched plastic, he focused on the shape, not an island, but a vessel, its hull low in the water. Salvation might arrive at last. He scrambled for the signal flare tucked in his emergency kit, hands slick with sweat and trembling from sudden hope. The raft, Aegis, swayed beneath him as he fumbled the pin free and struck the flare against a metal rail. A brilliant red streak shot skyward, erupting in a plume of smoke that could be seen for miles. He waved frantic arms, shouting hoarse words into the wind, hoping the sailors would spot him. His voice cracked raw from days of rationed water, but he forced it louder. The vessel's silhouette sharpened a cargo ship larger than the freighter he'd come from, moving eastward on a parallel course. He kept the flare aloft until its glow dimmed to ash, then grabbed the mirror from its lanyard and angled it toward the sun, sending glints across the surface. He worked without pause, heart lodged in his throat, picturing rescue teams, warm food, dry clothes, the end of this endless drift. But as the ship drew nearer, his hope faltered. Its deck bustled with motion men, hauling lines, machinery creaking, but no heads turned skyward. The ship's course held steady, oblivious to his signals. He swung the mirror faster, flashing desperate bursts like Morse code SOS. The vessel's wake grew loud, hollow waves, licking the raft's edges. Then slowly, inexorably, it began to steer away. His reflection in the mirror twisted with panic. Hands shook, shoulders slumped. He dropped to his knees, chest heaving, and watched until the ship was a speck, swallowed by mist. No horn sounded, no boats launched, no searchlights found him. Only the sea remained indifferent once more. Salt water stung his eyes as tears, grief, and fury commingled, blurred his vision. He pounded the deck with open palms, a silent cry of betrayal. Aegis creaked mournfully underfoot, as though sharing his anguish. For a long moment, he sat hunched over, stomach churning with nausea and sorrow. The rituals he had woven, tally knots, prayers, offerings, felt hollow in the face of such cruel irony. He swallowed bile tasting salt and despair and gripped the life ring bumper until his knuckles whitened. Each breath burned his lungs, each heartbeat pounded his temples, reminding him that he was still alive and still alone. Night approached before he could summon enough resolve to stand. Twilight's steel blue hush wrapped around him as he gathered the ruined flare casing and shattered mirror. He packed them into a pouch, sealing away the tools that had become symbols of dashed hope. Beneath the canopy, he laid out his altar, the flat stone, the dried fish offerings, the looped rope. Tonight he would acknowledge the pain, but he would not let it break him. He placed a single shrine candle, the last from his pack, beside the altar. Striking a match, he lit it with hands unsteady but determined. The tiny flame wavered in the dusk breeze, casting dancing shadows on the raft's floorboards. He knelt and placed the fish fillet upon the stone, murmuring, "For hope that falters, thank you for the lessons." He bowed his head, the candle's glow reflecting in his tear-blurred eyes. Then he whispered, "I endure." Darkness fell like a curtain, and he settled against the life ring, the candle's light flickering before dying in the moist air. The raft drifted westward under a quilt of stars, each one indifferent, yet eternal. He closed his eyes and allowed himself a single concession sorrow. He felt its weight like a stone in his chest, but he let it settle there, neither pushing nor resisting, until the soft rise and fall of breath steadied him. When dawn broke, the horizon was empty, the sea a silver plain once more. He rose, stiff-kneed, and retrieved the paddle. Each stroke carried grief, but also resolve. He steered toward where the ship had been, as though tracking the phantom of salvation. Even as his mind insisted on a new strategy, he would focus on creating signal debris, mirrors, floats, flags, and position them for passing ships. He would refine his flares, guard his supply of matches, and sharpen his mirror shards against metal until they glinted like beacons. He opened the emergency kit and counted the remaining supplies. 2 smoke flares, 3 matches, the survival mirror. He tucked them into his belt, closer than ever, a lifeline in his battered hands. He resolved to ration his hopes as carefully as his water measured in moments, not days. Midday sun bore down as he mounted a new lookout on the highest plank. He tied a length of rope to a life ring and hoisted it aloft on a broken spar, fashioning a makeshift flagpole. He grabbed a torn sheet of red tarpaulin and wrapped it around the ring, knotting it to unfurl like a signal flag. From this vantage, he scanned every inch of the horizon, squinting through his binocular shards, heart sharpened between fear and determination. Hours passed. He alternated between waving the flag, flashing the mirror, and lighting smoke when he spotted any distant dark shape. He repeated the flare drill twice more, each ignition a small sun against the azure sky, each flare track a whispered plea. He screamed his dismay into the wind. "Look, see me. but the sea swallowed his voice. Exhaustion finally forced him down. He nestled beneath the canopy and drew out the tally rope, adding knots for the new day. He counted every action, paddling, repairing, signaling, foraging, as a victory against despair. Each knot was a reminder that though hope might waver, survival demanded persistence. He lay back and stared at the underside of the canopy, now patched more times than he could count. Threads and fabric remnants formed a riot of lines, each repair a testament to his ingenuity. In those crisscrossed patches, he saw his own story, broken pieces, held together by necessity and hope. When twilight softened the sea to glass, he lit the lantern and sat at his altar once more. He placed 2 fish fillets on the stone, one for sustenance, one for spirit, and murmured his ritual of gratitude. He lit a stick of driftwood incense, its smoky curl reminding him that even the smallest flame could fend off the dark. He spoke into the quiet. Tomorrow, the sea will carry me closer. Tomorrow, I will be seen. He blew out the incense and the candle, then lay against the decking with his head on the life ring. The raft whispered beneath him. The flag fluttered softly in the breeze, and he closed his eyes. Though hope had faltered like a dying flame, it still burned at his core. He drifted to sleep, embraced by uncertainty and a stubborn, unyielding resolve to survive. The pre-dawn ocean lay glassy and still, as though holding its breath. He stirred from slumber senses razor sharp with fatigue and vigilance. He reached for the paddle and nudged Aegis into motion, steering toward a distant patch of kelp where fish be often fed. He hoped a catch might coincide with daylight's first warmth and the promise of sustenance. But as he glided forward, a flicker beneath the surface caught his eye. Too sleek, too purposeful to be mere fish. He froze. The water darkened in undulating shapes, long and tapering. His breath caught. Sharks. He remembered the warnings opportunistic hunters drawn to the scent of blood or the thrash of prey. His own recent surgery, the salted water rinses the stray drop of crimson from his thigh, each might serve as a beacon. He lowered the paddle heart pounding. The kelp fronds swayed around him, concealing a dozen shadows circling beneath the raft like silent sentinels. He reached for a length of rope, weighing the life ring heavy in his other hand. The ring, his buoyancy, aid his marker, could be a makeshift shield. But shield against what curiosity or aggression? A heavy swell walked Aegis, and one of the larger sharks breached the surface with a hiss of displaced water, its gray back arching in stainless steel curves. He caught a glimpse of the dorsal fin needle sharp and the disturbingly calm eye that regarded him. For a moment, neither moved, man and shark locked in primordial recognition. He steadied himself, every muscle coiled. He remembered stories of survivors who had fought off sharks with paddles and spears, who had used flares to drive predators away. His own arsenal was meager, a broken paddle, the life ring improvised hooks. But he could not yield. If pulled into the water, hypothermia or a single bite could end everything he'd fought for. Slowly he unhooked the life ring from its rope, tossing it just beyond the raft's edge. The ring drifted tantalizingly, a white target against dark water, drawing the shark's attention. 2 of them veered toward the float, their sleek bodies slicing through the sea. He exhaled tension, loosening by a fraction. The sharks, drawn by curiosity or hunger, slammed into the ring with blunt force. He heard the hollow clang as rubber met wood, then watched the current pull it farther away. He seized a moment of advantage. Snatching up the paddle, he crouched low and jabbed the water beside the nearest shark, sending a splash of salt and urgency. The creature recoiled, then circled back cooler and more calculating. Again, he jabbed, this time closer to its snout. The shark surged but diverted at the last instant, snapping its jaws shut inches from his paddle. A third shark, smaller, darker, rose nearer the raft's underside, testing its strength against the decking's worn beams. The wood groaned in protest. He could not allow the sharp teeth to breach Aegis's hull. Gathering courage, he reached into his belt pouch and withdrew the small flare gun. The metal was cold against his palm. He loaded the last smoke flare, his movements deliberate, despite trembling fingers. He aimed downward, placing the barrel a foot above the waterline, and fired. The flare spat a tongue of orange sparks into the sea, illuminating the water in violent crimson. The sharks recoiled in panic, scattering like startled dancers. The flare's hiss died as it hit the water steam, rising in ghost-like wisps. He did not hesitate. He grabbed the life ring's rope and hauled it back toward the raft. The ring bobbed slick with seawater, but intact. He tied it to a heavier beam, fastening it like a shield around the raft's base. Then he retrieved the paddle and thrust it into the water, pushing Aegis away from the kelp patch, away from the sharks that circled hungrily in the fading light. His heart pounded as adrenaline coursed through him. The incident had shaken him, but also reminded him of his resourcefulness. He had turned a dire threat into an opportunity to reinforce Aegis's defenses. He rebundled the flare gun and kicked the raft into open water, coaxing it westward with deep, steady strokes. As the sun rose, painting the sea in molten gold, he paused to assess. His leg throbbed where the suture had tugged in his harness. His arms burned from paddling, yet he felt an unexpected surge of triumph. He had faced death's teeth and won. The ocean's most fearsome predators had backed off, and he remained alive. He knew more sharks lurked beneath these waves, governed by the same hunger that drove him to eat. He would need constant vigilance. He resolved to rig a simple deterrent, a line of tied jerry cans, trailing behind Aegis, clattering beneath the surface to suggest a larger paddle-wielding creature. He scavenged 4 empty cans, threading them on a rope and securing it to the raft's stern. With each gentle chop of the paddle, the cans would clink and rattle, a noisy escort, warding off silent hunters. He spent the next hour arranging the cans, then tested their effect. He drifted back toward the kelp patch, far enough to provoke interest, close enough to test safety. Waves shifted them ominously, but no shark surfaced. When he angled back into open water, the cans clinked a steady rhythm, and he allowed himself a relieved smile. His morning catch awaited a cluster of fish hooked before dawn, lying in nerve-dampened fillets. He cooked them swiftly on his stove, savoring the warmth and the taste of victory over primal fear. He ate under the canopy head bent against the sun's glare and sipped fresh water reverently. He reclined afterward, letting the current cradle him. the world felt both more dangerous and more conquerable. He had stood toe to tooth against the ocean's dark lords and emerged intact. The sharks were predators. He was a survivor. Somewhere beyond the horizon, rescue might be waiting. But for now, each new dawn was a battleground, and each victory, no matter how small, carried him one stroke closer to home. The horizon rippled, and he froze mid-stroke. There, pale and wavering, was land a thin ribbon of sandy beach, backed by low, jagged rocks. His heart hammered. For months he had dreamed of shore, and now the dream hovered just beyond his paddle's reach. He nudged Aegis toward the island, the jerry-can deterrent clattering behind him like a heartbeat. As he drew closer, the shallow reef revealed itself in shifting turquoise bands, and he guided the raft over a narrow channel, careful not to scrape the planks. He beached Aegis on soft sand and slid off legs, trembling as they touched solid ground. The weight of land beneath his feet felt miraculous. No swells, no tilt, no need to brace. He stood arms outstretched, inhaling the scent of grass and salt and something else, earth. He knelt to cup handfuls of warm sand, letting grains slip through his fingers. It was real. He was not a castaway, but a traveler returned to terra firma. He searched for freshwater springs, recalling maps of Pacific atolls that often harbored hidden ponds. Inland, a scrub of low vegetation offered scant hope. He pushed through thorny bushes, his hands bleeding on sharp stems, toward a sunken depression that pooled rainwater after storms. There, in a shallow hollow, lay murky water tinged green with algae. He knelt and drank carefully, wincing as grit scraped his tongue, but the moisture filled his lungs and heart with relief. Nearby, eroded coral skeletons formed a maze of skeletal arches. He traced fingers over bleached ridges, marveling at their ghostly beauty. He picked up a shard of coral, a brittle white fragment, and held it like a relic. On the raft, he would use it as a cutting tool or as a symbol that land was possible. He set out to explore the island's interior, his paddle strapped to his back like a walking stick. The ground rose gradually to a low crest of boulders baked by sun and wind. He climbed boots sinking into sand and reached a plateau where grass tussled in the breeze. From this vantage, he saw the full arc of the atoll, a narrow crescent of beach, a ring of reef, and beyond the open ocean. In the center, a shallow lagoon mirrored the sky. He descended toward the lagoon's edge boots, leaving footprints in wet mud. He knelt and scooped water into his palms. It was brackish, but cooler than the algae pond. He drank, then used his purification tablets, slightly swollen, but active, to treat a small flask. Within minutes, the water glinted clear and sweet. He drank deeply, letting the clean liquid chase away weeks of salt's bitterness. He explored further, spotting clusters of hardy shrubs bearing small orange berries. He tested one with caution, chewed the flesh, spat out the seed, and waited. No burning sensation. He collected more, gathering a handful of tart fruit that promised vitamin C. He stashed them in a cloth pouch, picturing their bright tang on days when fish and seaweed had grown monotonous. He pressed on toward a stand of twisted palms, fronds yellowed by sun. At their base, hollow trunks formed cavities. He inserted the coral shard into one and pried loose a chunk of fibrous husk. Crushed and soaked in his purified flask, the fibrous husk yielded clear water, an accidental discovery that felt like a gift from the island itself. He drank again, exhilarated by abundance. He sat beneath a palm's shade and surveyed his finds: purified lagoon water, berries, husk pulp coral shard, and reef-dusted boots. The island, for all its isolation, had offered sustenance. He allowed himself a moment of gratitude, closing his eyes against the sea's roar on the far side. But the island's idyll was fleeting. As he ventured toward the windward coast, he found the shore stripped bare of life. Waves pounded coral skeletons, grinding shells into powder that clung to skin. No birds circled above, no crabs scuttled between rocks. The beach was a stark tableau of nature's indifference. He realized that beyond this tiny haven lay only endless sea. He gathered firewood drift logs, bleached by sun, and returned to Aegis. He built a small fire on the sand, using flares from his kit to ignite kindling. The flames sputtered, then caught and crackled. He roasted a handful of berries over the embers, their juices bubbling into sweet smoky caramel. The taste was sublime, a fleeting banquet amid desolation. He filled a barrel with lagoon water, testing each swill for grit. Then he reboarded Aegis, his pack laden with provisions. The raft bobbed invitingly, as though urging him onward. He paused, looking back at the island's silhouette against the sky. It had given him life and shown him nature's duality, shelter and barrenness. He touched the coral shard, holstered at his belt, proof that he had stood on solid earth. He paddled away, eyes fixed on the island shrinking behind him. The reef's rim caught his paddle blade, and he waited for a lull to push free into deeper water. Once clear, he adjusted sailcloth panels to catch the evening breeze. The current tugged westward, and he let Aegis ride it, conserving energy. Nightfall found him again, beneath the canopy, the island's memory flickering in his mind like firelight. He arranged his spoils: a flask of lagoon water, a pouch of berries, dried husk fiber, and the coral shard. He offered them at his altar, each an emblem of land's fleeting mercy. He set the berries atop the stone, pouring a small offering of lagoon water alongside. He whispered, "Thank you for this gift. May it guide me home." He lay back and gazed at the stars, naming constellations, as though mapping his destiny. The island was gone, swallowed by night's embrace, but its lessons remained. The ocean might isolate him, but land was possible, however ephemeral. He closed his eyes, mouth tasting sweet smoke and salt, and promised himself he would search again for shore, no matter how many islands proved mere mirages. He drifted into slumber beneath the canopy's gentle sway, but the night was restless. Dreams tangled with reality until he could no longer tell one from the other. In his fevered mind, Aegis became a great ship again, its hull whole, its deck bustling with laughter and steam. He heard the cook calling him for breakfast, smelled fresh coffee and warm bread. He lifted a hand to answer, but his palm met only empty air. The world snapped back in rain-soaked gusts, and he awoke tangled in sheets of sweat, throat parched. Over the next days, the line between waking and dreaming blurred further. At dawn, he would find himself naming coconuts as if they were crewmen. At high noon, he would swear the wind was carrying distant hymns. Once paddling toward the haze on the horizon, he glimpsed a cathedral spire rising above the waves, its stained glass windows alive with sunrise colors. He steered toward it until it dissolved into a shifting cloud bank. He bit his lip against panic. Was the spire proof of salvation or a mirage conjured by exhaustion? He knew he needed anchor points in reality or risk drifting forever into his own mind. He returned to his rituals with newfound rigor. Each morning he splashed fresh water onto his face and recited his compass prayer, "I see the sky. I know my way." Each evening he placed his offerings at the altar and thanked the sea by name, Ocean Mother of Storms. These acts tethered him to the physical world, pulling him back when his mind threatened to stray. Yet the visions persisted. One twilight he saw her face framed by dawn's first pink light hair glinting like sea spray. She stood at Aegis's rail smiling encouragement, as though she'd been waiting all these months. He reached for her hand, but the moment he touched the mist of her figure, she vanished. In the stillness that followed the ocean lay flat and silent, and he felt more alone than ever. That night, terror crept into his bones. He wrapped himself in sailcloth knees drawn tight and lit the lantern. Its frail glow illuminated the altar's offerings. Even their solidity felt suspect. He leaned close to the stone-running fingers over its cool surface, as if to prove it was not dream. He clasped the life ring beside him, willing its weight to ground him. He closed his eyes and whispered a plea, "Show me truth, not visions." At dawn, he awoke to a sky rent by lightning, a sudden squall brewing beyond the horizon. Rain fell in silver slashes, and he hurried to secure the canopy. As he worked, he noticed the lightning's reflection on the water, precise geometric patterns that mirrored the compass rose he'd carved. He paused, struck by the symmetry. Was it coincidence or a sign? He held his breath as the next bolt cracked overhead, tracing the same compass lines. In that instant, reality and faith seemed to merge the storm's chaos, aligning with his own inner map. He exhaled a release that felt like acceptance. If the sea spoke in lightning and mirages, perhaps he needed to listen without demanding proof. He dipped a cloth in fresh water and wiped the compass rose clean, breathing gratitude. He would trust both his eyes and his instincts, integrating the visions into his journey rather than battling them. Over the following weeks, he monitored his hallucinations like weather patterns. When visions of home appeared, he cataloged them in his mind: what day, what hour, what ocean swell. He compared them against real events: a passing ship, a sudden gust, a pod of dolphins, to find correlations. He kept notes in code, carving tiny symbols in a spare plank: a fish for a friendly vision, a shark for a frightening one, a star when he felt guided. These records became another layer of ritual tracking, not only days, but the movements of his own psyche. He also leaned into faith. He lacked formal religion, but he constructed prayers from memory lines of psalms he'd heard as a child, reframed to suit his context. He credited his raft's survival to divine mercy when lightning struck the mast but left the hull unharmed, or when a stray current guided him past deadly reefs. He thanked the unseen forces that kept fish nibbling at his lines, and he asked forgiveness for the life he took to stay alive. The dual practice of charting visions and uttering faith's words coaxed serenity from his days. Epiphanies arrived in moments of silence once. As he scooped seawater into a flask, he realized that each drop held the ocean's memory of storm and calms mirroring his own soul's turbulence and peace. He paused to listen to the water's hiss in the container and felt tears of wonder at the interconnectedness of all things. On day 183, he saw the cathedral spire again, tall and gleaming at dawn's edge. But now he did not chase it. He watched as the spire's glass petals opened to the sun, then folded and sank below the horizon. He murmured thanks and returned to paddling, feeling that the vision had been a benediction rather than a lure. He continued his course, buoyed by faith that whatever he saw was a guide, not a trick. The hallucinations also brought moments of stark warning. One night, he heard distant laughter, bright, carefree voices, only to realize it was the echo of wind in a cracked metal panel. He patched the panel at first light, equating each repair with the healing of his mind's fractures. He lined spare boards beneath the canopy so that creaks would not summon phantom voices, crafting quarters both physically secure and psychologically safe. In sacred moments, he composed fragments of poems. Salt and memory entwine, waves carve paths in bone and mind, hope drifts on broken spine. He carved these lines onto his coral shard, with a shard of flint running his finger over the grooves as a meditation on perseverance. The coral fragment, a gift from the shore, became both relic and notebook, marking faith in the tactile world. By the time he reached day 250, visions had waned into gentle companions, brief visitors who offered insight rather than delusion. When he glimpsed faces of home, he thanked them and let the image dissolve. When he saw storm-born symbols, he noted their timing and moved on. His raft, once merely wood and rope, had become a vessel of mind and spirit. Isolation remained his constant adversary, but he no longer feared its endless roar. He had mapped his psyche as thoroughly as he had charted the ocean's currents. Rituals, records, and faith served as buoys against the deep. Every sunrise brought a choice: to drift into dreams or to paddle toward purpose. And each time he chose both, permitting imagination to soar while keeping his body tethered to reality. As twilight fell on day 390, he sat at his altar, the ocean's hymn as accompaniment. He placed on the stone both a fish fillet and a drop of desalinated water, honoring body and spirit alike. He closed his eyes and listened to the sea's steady song, feeling at peace with the interplay of faith, vision, and will. In that quiet reverie, he understood that survival was as much an act of the mind as a contest of the body. The hallucinations and faith that once threatened to unmoor him had become the very anchors that held him fast. And so, under the soft glow of lantern light and starshine, a solitary man on a fragile raft found unity between what was seen and what was believed, and steered himself ever closer to the promise of rescue. The ocean's vastness felt sharper now, an unrelenting reminder of how far he'd come and how far he still had to go. Day 359. The tally knots on his rope had grown too closely packed to count at a glance. His provisions, once generous, were now skeletal reminders of a feast that seemed unimaginable. 3 dried fish fillets, a handful of brittle seaweed sheets, and less than a liter of desalinated water. Each day had become a calculus of survival, every swallow measured, every scrap weighed. Yet despite the scarcity, he refused to yield. Hunger and thirst were constant adversaries, but his will had proven fiercer. His mornings began with the ritual of measurement. He lined up 3 small flasks on the decking beneath the canopy, 1 for dawn, 1 for midday, and 1 for dusk. Into the first, he poured a quarter of the remaining water, closing his eyes against the sting of ration. He placed 1 dried fillet beside it, its texture rough in his calloused hand. As he ate and drank, he recited the compass prayer softly, the words, "A lifeline, I see the sky, I know my way." The ritual lent structure to a world unmoored by drift and scarcity. He steered Aegis westward, following a current he judged by the drift of sargassum lines beneath his raft. Occasionally, he paused to cast a final line, a single hook baited with a crumb of fish or a pinch of algae. Most hours passed in silence, the ocean offering no reply. But sometimes, as if in mercy, a small skipjack or mackerel would seize the bait, its fight brief and desperate. He would secure it, fillet it with the coral shard, and divide its flesh into the next ration. The reward was often a single bite of fresh protein luxury beyond price. As days ticked away, fatigue etched deeper lines across his face. His skin hung loose in patches from sun damage and malnutrition, and his shoulders sagged beneath the burden of breath that came too quickly. His vision sometimes blurred, requiring him to rest and wait for tears to wash grit from his eyes. Yet his spirit flickered with sparks of resourcefulness. He repurposed empty flasks as flotation aids beneath weakened decking, and he rigged a second canopy from algae-dried cloth to trap early morning dew. Each innovation risked failure, but each success meant another hour, another day. Night times were both a refuge and a trial. The ocean's hush beneath the stars reminded him of all he'd endured, storms that threatened to shatter, Aegis infections that threatened to consume his flesh, hallucinations that tested his grip on reality, and predators whose presence he could only fend off at the edge of blades and flares. But the night also gifted him rare calm moments, when the raft swayed gently, when the sky's trajectory offered a fleeting flash of the North Star, and when his spirits rose with quiet triumph. On day 410, something miraculous occurred. He caught sight of a signal, a tendril of smoke curling above the horizon. His heart thundered as adrenaline surged through the haze of hunger. He scrambled for the mirror and angled it toward a distant fishing boat, its nets trailing behind. He flashed the mirror like a beacon, and when that failed, he struck a smoke flare, sending a plume of ochre smoke against the blue. The boat's crew turned, spotting the signals, and altered course. He watched as they approached, tears blurring his vision. The fishing boat reached Aegis near dusk, its deck alive with voices and spotlights. He climbed aboard with trembling limbs, collapsing against a rail as hands reached out with blankets and water bottles. They wrapped him in warmth and nourishment, strange clanging devices that tasted of hope. He looked back at his raft, battered but buoyant, and felt a pang of gratitude. Aegis had been his shelter, his challenge, and his home for 1,400 days, no 1,438. Time had warped here, but numbers remained 438 days alone at sea. As the boat carried him toward a larger vessel, he pressed a hand to his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart against ribs that had known too little food. He closed his eyes and reflected on the raft's last hours, how he had tended each brittle ration, how he had patched every torn canvas, how he had whispered prayers into the dark. Each act had been a stitch in the tapestry of his survival. When he stepped onto the deck of the rescue ship, the salt air tasted different, sweeter, laden with engines and human voices. He was wrapped in blankets, guided to a cabin where a steaming bowl of soup awaited. He lifted the spoon and let the warm broth slide down his throat, a simple act of nourishment that felt like grace. He held the spoon like a sacred chalice and whispered thanks for the journey and for its end. He woke before dawn, heart already racing with anticipation. All night the sea had whispered promises, faint lights drifting on the horizon, distant rumblings of engines. The hum of hope carried on salt-kissed air. He sat up slowly on Aegis muscles, stiff but fueled by adrenaline. In his belt pouch lay his final smoke flare. Perched atop a pallet beam was his signal mirror, polished to a razor's gleam. Today he would seize rescue or risk losing his chance forever. The first pale light revealed a distant silhouette, an aircraft wing slicing the sky, its shape familiar from countless landings and takeoffs. He scrambled to the raft's highest point, an improvised mast of broken spar, and clambered atop the decking with the agility born of months of balancing on creaking wood. Below him, the current tugged steadily westward, carrying Aegis toward shipping lanes. He held the flare aloft, breathing deep to steady fingers stiff with cold and excitement. The plane dipped its wing, then banked east, its pilot curious but not yet committed. He struck the flare's cartridge, sending a plume of thick white smoke into the morning air. It billowed upward, then sideways in the breeze, forming a brilliant column against the pastel sky. His voice, hoarse from months of silence, fractured the dawn as he shouted, "Rescue, rescue!" He waved both arms, hatless head shining in the sunrise. The aircraft hesitated, then dove lower engines, screaming, as if startled by his plea. He switched to the mirror, angling it toward the sun to send rapid, urgent flashes below the fuselage. Each burst caught the pilot's eye, a Morse code carved in light SOS. The plane banked again, this time on a direct course for him. His pulse pounded. Each beat felt like a lifeline. Within minutes, he heard a dull thrum growing from the horizon, the throbbing engines of a search and rescue helicopter, its blades carving arcs of air that rocked the ocean into choppy waves. He dropped to one knee, tears blurring his vision as the craft hovered above him. A downwash of wind buffeted Aegis, and he braced against the deck arms wrapped around a beam. The pilot flew in low, and right beside him, the side door swinging open to reveal a rescue swimmer dangling on a cable. He gripped the beam and steadied his breath as the swimmer touched down on the decking boots, splashing onto the wooden slats. The rescuer's uniform was a blur of bright orange patches and straps gleaming in the morning light. Before he could speak, the swimmer knelt and wrapped an arm around his shoulders, hauling him upright with surprising gentleness. The man's voice crackled through a headset. "You're safe now. We've got you." Relief crashed through him like a wave. His knees buckled, and the rescuer held him steady, guiding him to kneel again. The helicopter's rotors painted the sea with white caps, the wind tearing at his sun-bleached clothes. He closed his eyes, savoring the moment, the rush of air, the thrum of engines, the solidity of another human being's presence. Hands reached down with a survival harness, and he allowed the rescuer to clip him in. As they lifted, the raft receded beneath him. Aegis, his world, his adversary, and yet his savior. He watched the planks shrink, the patches of tarp flutter, the jerry cans glint in the morning sun. He raised a trembling hand in farewell, and the swimmer nodded. "You did well," he called over the roar. "Rest now." The helicopter banked and raced toward a passing vessel, the search and rescue cutter that had launched the chopper. As they approached, the cutter's crew, hair plastered by wind faces lit with concern, leaned over the rail, binoculars trained on his ascent. The swimmer lowered him into a waiting net basket, and he slid from height back into the world of solid decks and human voices. He was helped to his feet by arms as steady as ropes, guided into the cutter's cabin where blankets, water, and medical gear awaited. He tasted fresh coffee, bittersweet and hot, like an elixir of civilization. Each sip burned away layers of salt and fear. A medic examined his thigh wound, gently unpinning the crude sutures and cleaning the incision properly for the first time in months. The antiseptic sting was a reminder of his ordeal, but also a renewal, each cleanse a promise of healing. Crew members brought him food, warm oatmeal, fruit slices, and sandwiches that he ate with trembling hands. He chewed slowly, marveling at texture and flavor, each bite a revelation of what he'd missed. He listened to the cutter's engines hum beneath his chair, feeling the vessel's gentle roll as it cut through the waves toward a safe harbor. The captain, weathered and kind, entered the cabin and extended a hand. "Welcome back," he said, voice soft with respect. "You're a survivor in every sense." The man's eyes were gentle, betraying admiration and relief. He guided him to a window as land emerged on the horizon, a green sweep of coastline buildings clustered around a harbor, smokestacks in the distance. Home at last. He pressed his palm against the glass, feeling the ship's vibration. Months had hemmed the passage of time in tides and sunrises. Now he counted the hours to his reunion with loved ones. He closed his eyes, head bowed, as tears, no longer tears of desperation, but of gratitude, slipped down his cheeks. Later, as the sun climbed over the buildings, he stepped onto the dock. A small crowd had gathered, rescue crew reporters, friends he hadn't seen in 438 days. Among them stood one figure, her posture hesitant, her eyes glistening. He moved through the crowd as though in a dream until he reached her. She opened her arms, and he collapsed into embrace, sweat and salt mingling with tears. The world around them cracked open in light and laughter. He held her tightly, breathing deep, tasting the sweetness of land's air. The courier of survival stories would have called this moment homecoming, but for him, it was something more proof that hope, like a life ring tossed into the void, could be grasped by will alone. As they parted, she placed a gentle hand on his cheek and whispered, "You're safe." He nodded, voice broken. "I'm here. I made it." And in that instant, the journey's end felt like a beginning, a chance to weave this survival into life's narrative, to share lessons forged between waves and wind. He looked back at the cutter sliding away, then at the sea's gentle ebb, and smiled. The ocean's vastness remained, but he had won his place upon its edge. He stepped off the cutter's deck onto solid ground and felt the earth's steady pulse beneath his boots. Every nerve hummed with sensation, air that did not taste of salt, a breeze free of brine, the distant hum of traffic instead of seagulls. Reporters crowded around their questions, drowning in a torrent of emotions. He saw flashes, cameras, microphones, hands reaching for his sleeve, and the world felt both overwhelming and intimately alive. He let himself be guided toward a waiting vehicle, hands still shaking from months of gripping pallet beams and jerry cans. Each breath felt miraculous. Inside the car, the seats were plush and forgiving. He sank into the upholstery, closing his eyes as the engine purred. The harness straps that had held him aloft in the helicopter were gone, replaced by a seatbelt clicking quietly across his chest. He had forgotten the comfort of such restraint. Outside, city buildings gleamed, and streetlights pulsed in patterns alien and mesmerizing. The car moved with precision, no swells, no sudden lurches, only smooth motion. He exhaled, half laughing, half crying. They brought him home in the amber light of dusk. The neighborhood looked unchanged, mailboxes, white picket fences, blooming roses, but he felt like a stranger returning to a place once known. He walked up the path, each step deliberate, as if reacquainting himself with gravity. The door swung open before he reached it, and she stood there, eyes bright and breath caught. He hesitated, heart pounding, as memories of Aegis and the endless sea flooded his mind. She reached for him slowly. He closed the gap, wrapping arms around her like a man clutching a lifeline. Her warmth pressed against chilled bones and sunburned skin. Her heartbeat steadied his own. He breathed in the scent of her hair, lavender and home, and pressed his face against her neck. Every heartbeat in his chest felt sacred. He whispered, "I'm here," and the words carried the weight of storms, sharks, and solitude. She murmured back, "Welcome home," and the phrase felt both simple and profound. Inside, the walls were lined with framed photographs, smiles, sunsets, gatherings. He traced one frame with a trembling finger, the last picture taken before he boarded the freighter, his arm around her shoulder. In the months since that snapshot had become a beacon. Now it hung in living color, proof of a life reclaimed. They sat together at the kitchen table. A cup of hot tea waited for him, steam rising like morning mist. He wrapped both hands around the mug, feeling heat seep into bruised fingertips. He lifted it to his lips, tasting warmth and sweetness, and let the liquid calm the storm in his chest. Across from him lay a plate of food, no rationed fillets but scrambled eggs, toast, and fresh fruit. He picked at it at first, unsure, then surrendered to hunger, eating with deliberate gratitude. Every sight, sound, and taste reminded him of what he'd endured. The bruises on his leg still throbbed, a vivid map of infection and self-surgery. He flexed the knee, wincing at the memory of stitches. Her hand found his fingers, tracing scars. He allowed her to soothe him, pressing bandaged skin beneath a towel. He realized that while his body carried proof of survival, it was his mind that bore the deepest wounds. In the evenings that followed, he lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, the fan's slow rotation echoing the ocean's lullaby. Sleep came fitfully, dreams replaying storms and shark silhouettes. He woke in sweat, heart racing, until her gentle touch on his arm brought him back. She learned each flash of fear eyes, darting lip quivering, and soothed him with quiet words. "You're safe." Sometimes he wept the tears a release, and she held him until his breathing stilled. He began to see a counselor, a survivor's fellow traveler, whose office smelled of lavender oil and soft carpets. He spoke of fear and hallucinations, of the ways solitude had both strengthened and eroded him. He recounted his rituals, the carved coral shard, the tally knots. Each memory he gave voice to felt lighter, as though spoken into the counselor's quiet presence. He learned that trauma's currents ran deep, but could be navigated with support. He practiced grounding exercises, focusing on 5 things he could see, 4 he could touch, 3 he could hear, methods that mirrored his ocean rituals, but anchored him to land. Day by day, he ventured outside to parks where grass felt like a carpet under bare feet, to cafes where laughter mingled with clinking cups. Occasionally, the scent of salt would drift a passerby's cologne or a bakery's sea-salted caramel, and for a moment, he'd pause. Breath-catching mind drifting back to the open water. Then he'd name the ferry or the traffic hum, grounding himself with a compass phrase. I see the sky, I know my way. Each repetition stitched him tighter into this new world. Months later, he visited Aegis's resting place, a marine research center where his raft lay in gentle disrepair, a testament to human ingenuity. He ran a hand along the rough wood, recalling storms and victories. He left the coral shard nestled in the life ring, a relic of faith and creativity. As he turned to leave, he felt a final tug of gratitude toward the ocean's mercurial embrace. Back on shore, he stood at the water's edge, toes in the foam, and breathed deep. He carried scars and stories within him, gifts of survival and humility. The waves lapped in rhythm, with his heart no longer a threat, but a reminder of life's ebb and flow. He whispered, "Thank you to the sea," then walked away, each step firm on forgiving soil. He lies in bed, the weight of each breath slowing as night enfolds him. Soft pillows cradle his head, and the distant hum of traffic becomes a lullaby rather than a threat. He closes his eyes and recalls the raft's creaking beams, the hiss of distilled water, and the flare of lightning's compass rose. These memories float gently in his mind like fragments of a dream, both vivid and distant. His thigh burns lightly, where the suture scar remains a tender reminder of survival's cost, but the ache fades into warmth. Outside, the world hums in a softer key, crickets in tall grass, a breeze whispering through curtains, the low murmur of household sounds. He inhales the scent of linen and lavender anchored to the sanctuary of home. His pulse slows as he drifts between wakefulness and sleep, each heartbeat a quiet affirmation here, now safe. He drifts on a softer current than the ocean's, weaving through dreams of laughter and green fields of warm embraces and shared cups of tea. Each dream lengthens like a sigh, unfolding gently, touching upon moments of peace that he once feared lost forever. In these final moments, his mind glides past memories of storms and sharks, exchanging fear for calm sunsets over open seas, laughter echoing in sunlit kitchens, the embrace that waited beyond the horizon. He exhales a long, slow release, as though setting down a burden he no longer needs to carry. The soft rustle of sheets is his only company, and his thoughts become as soft as the air on his skin. In the hush before dawn, he senses gratitude rising a gentle tide that carries him toward rest. Sleep finds him at last, and with it the promise of another sunrise, one unmarked by salt and survival, but by healing and quiet possibility. His journey across the endless deep has ended, but his voyage continues in the safe harbor of dreams.